Well, the BOI filing is back. That's right. This report you have to file to the federal government saying who owns or controls your LLC or corporation. That is back. The very last case, Smith versus Department of Treasury, which was an injunction saying you didn't need to file it, was just overturned yesterday. So today, February 19th, 2025, FINcen, the Department of the Treasury that enforces this BOI, has said you got to file it now. But we're giving you an extension. Now, I'm going to get into that today in this live. I'm going to get into the case history, what's going on in the courts, what are the politics happening right now at Department of Treasury and within the Trump administration, what are they doing? And then we're going to get into how do you actually file this BOI for those of you that are going to comply and do this. Let's first talk about the case history right now. Now, this last case, Smith versus Yellen Department of Treasury, was just overturned, like I said, a couple days ago. Now, what that case was a federal district court in Texas that said BOIs are unconstitutional. Now, you might be confused because there was two cases out of Texas that said BOIs were unconstitutional, and there was a national injunction put in place in both cases. The first one that most people know about is the Texas Top Cop Shop case, which went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And just a month ago, the U.S. Supreme Court lifted the injunction and said, you know what? This might be constitutional. It might not. We're still considering the case, but we're removing the injunction. And until we decide later in the year, U.S. Supreme Court, we're not letting the injunction stay, which means you've got to comply and file a BOI in the meantime. Now, when the U.S. Supreme Court decided that case, there was still another injunction pending. That injunction was this Smith case. The Smith case injunction you could rely on. Last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, you could rely on that and say, I don't need to file a BOI. And many of our clients were doing that because they don't want to file a BOI unless they absolutely have to. Now, that Smith case was just overturned 2 days ago. So the current status right now in the courts is there is no BOI case that you can rely on to say, I don't need to file. There's a case in the U.S. Supreme Court right now. That's the main one, Texas Top Cop Shop. And that is going to be heard later in March. There's going to be oral arguments, and there'll be a decision, of course, later in the year on it. They don't decide these quickly in the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, in that Texas Top Cop Shop case, it's a tongue twister, there's an argument that this is unconstitutional. There's a chance that that argument may prevail. The sad thing is, you're not going to have time to wait for that because the filing requirement has already passed. It was December 31st of 2024 for anyone that had an entity already in existence. Now, where are we sitting today? Now that this Smith case has been reversed, you have to file a BOI. As a lawyer, I cannot tell you that there's any legal case, any court ruling that you can rely on right now that says you do not have to file a BOI. Now, you may take the position, and I can already read the comment flying in right now, saying, Matt, I can rely on the Constitution to not have to file this. Okay, but I'm just saying, if you're going to follow that train of thought, there's no court order I can tell you to rely on. You're rolling the dice based on how the U.S. Supreme Court is going to decide this. Now, probably greater than the court decision in the case is the politics of this. To me, the biggest development out of all of this was not the court order out of Texas where they reversed the injunction. The biggest development is the new notice from FINcen. The new notice from FINcen is Donald Trump's Department of Treasury. This is his Secretary of Treasury, his FINcen department. A lot of people were not filing earlier because they thought Trump wasn't going to enforce this against small business. I kind of thought that too. I was like, I don't know that the Trump administration is going to actually enforce this, particularly against small business. Well, they are. This is the big development right now that I think is bigger than the court cases, is the Trump Department of Treasury is requiring this. They are enforcing it. This BOI deadline has now been extended, though. They're giving you 30 days, which is until March 21st, 2025. So if you had an LLC or corporation in the past, or you've set one up in 2024 or even in early 2025, you now have a deadline of March 21st, 2025 to file the BOI. Now, I'm going to get into the BOI here in a minute, what it is, how you file it, different options and services you can use, what needs to be included in it, what are the exemptions. I'm going to explain all that here in a second. But the politics on this seem to have been clarified by this FINcen notice, which again is out of Trump's Department of Treasury. So you need to file it. Doesn't look like the Trump administration is going to get you out of it. Now, there is a pending bill going through Congress right now that's trying to overturn this requirement. It does have bipartisan support, but it has not passed either the House or the Senate. So we don't know how that's going to end up. Maybe the Trump administration will get behind that. Maybe not. We don't know. But there's no legal thing I can tell you that you can rely on to get out of the BOI right now. Maybe pending legislation that's going to pass. Maybe the Supreme Court goes in your favor. Now, what is happening right now is FINcen is saying you need to file. We've given you time. We've let these cases kind of work their way through it. We haven't been enforcing this. We haven't assessed anyone penalties. No one's got jail time, which, by the way, there's potential jail time and over $500 a day penalties for failure to comply with this. So this is serious. Now, what this is all about is the federal government thinks people are using LLCs and corporations for money laundering, drug trafficking, and other illegal activities. And they want to know who owns these companies and controls them. Now, on the other side of this, a lot of people, business owners, are saying that's none of your business. LLCs and corporations are filed with the state. I have a Arizona LLC. I have a Nevada corporation. I have a Pennsylvania S corporation. This is not set up at the federal government. This is a state-created entity. So why do I got to give the federal government information about my state-created entity? And a lot of states agreed with that. In fact, 25 state attorney generals filed an appeal in the U.S. Supreme Court and said, get out of this. We monitor entities and the requirements of what you have to file to complete an entity, to have an LLC or corporation. Get out of our way, federal government. Let us do our job at the state level. So there's a lot of politics on this. There's a lot of issues, of course. The Supreme Court's going to have to decide on this. But right now, you do need to file this, and you have until March 21st, 2025. Now, you got a couple different ways you can approach this. You can say, Matt, I'm not doing it. I'm going to wait till the Supreme Court decides on this. That could be an approach. I can't, as a lawyer, tell you to take that right now. If you want to, just know you're running the risk of some penalties. I don't think they're going to be enforcing jail time by the time the Supreme Court decides the case. And you might say, you know what, I'll wait till later in the year when the U.S. Supreme Court decides it. And if I have to file it, depending on how that case goes, I'll file it then. Not my recommendation, but I understand some of you may go that route. The next option you may do, which is I think what I would recommend here, given where the courts are at, where the indications we've seen from the Trump administration, their Department of Treasury is, you got to file now. Okay, you've got until March 21st, 2025. You need to get in and file this thing for your LLC or corporation. Now, when you file this, you can do it yourself. You can go to fincen.gov and right there, click File BOI Report. When you go there, there's a list of information you have to submit to file this. You're going to say the name of the LLC or corporation, the address, the tax ID for the LLC or corporation. And then you have to list two groups of people that are part of the LLC or corporation. First, anyone who owns 25% or more. They need to be listed on this Beneficial Ownership Information Report, the BOI report. So anyone that owns 25% or more, their name is going to be listed on this, their address, and they also have to upload a government-issued ID. This could be a passport, a driver's license, a state ID card. It just needs to be a government-issued ID. And frankly, that's the big pain in the butt, is getting that government-issued ID uploaded and over to FINcen. Now, the second group of people, in addition to anyone that owns 25% or more, the second group of people that need to be disclosed on any LLC or corporation is anyone who has substantial control of the entity. For example, someone who's a manager of an LLC or corporation, the president of the corporation, or officers of a company. They would typically be deemed to have substantial control of the entity, so they need to be disclosed who they are, what's their address, and then include a government-issued ID for any of them. Now, if this is your own business, you're the manager of the LLC, and it's just you, you're the only one listed. If you're a company and you have a different president than the owner, or a different manager of the LLC than the member and ownership, you might have a couple people listed. Maybe it's a partnership of a few people. Maybe there's 3 partners in there. And then you would list, of course, who is all 3 of those partners, because you each own more than 25%, in addition to anyone who is the manager. Okay, so that's the rule, 25% or more, or who has substantial control, name, address, and also upload their government issued ID. Now, there is no fee from FINcen. Okay, if you're doing it yourself and you're hacking this out on your own, which you can do, there's no fee for this. Now, you may hire a service. Your CPA may do this. Your lawyer may do this. Your company compliance business may do this. I have a law firm. We filed this for thousands of our clients, okay, already, for new LLCs we set up, for clients we've set up in the past. We also have our company compliance business, Main Street Business Services, where we've set up, where we maintain 10,000 plus entities for clients, and we include your BOI report as part of the services for doing your renewal and your minutes as part of your entity. So if you're on that service, we would have done it for you already. So any of our customers that are listening here, we're on it for you. We're either taking care of it for you. Now, if you were setting up your entity or you're waiting to see how this BOI case shook out, well, now's your answer. You need to get back and file this BOI. Now, who knows what could happen? There could be something in the U.S. Supreme Court. I doubt there's going to be a lower court ruling of any significance on this, because the U.S. Supreme Court has already issued an opinion in the Texas Top Cop Shop case. That's such a tricky one. Saying that any injunction cannot be enforced right now. And instead, they're saying, we are going to decide this at the U.S. Supreme Court level. They're basically signaled to the lower courts, stop ruling on this and doing injunctions. We've got it. Let us decide the case. In other cases may be decided and there be an opinion here or there, but it will only be to the plaintiffs in that case. It won't be a nationwide injunction. All right. So you have to file this BOI report. The new deadline, March 21st, 2025. Now, I want to go over a couple common questions people ask. And I always see these in the comments when I'm doing a BOI report. What should I do, Matt? Well, I gave you the 2 options just a second ago. If you want to say, Matt, I'm pissed off about this. I don't believe that this is the federal government's information. I believe in privacy. I think the Supreme Court's going to rule and strike this down as unconstitutional. I'm willing to roll the dice. I might have some penalties. I'm going to see how that case shakes out. Fine. I get it. Go that route. Not my recommendation, though. Okay, I want to be clear. I just know it's out there and people are going to go down that route, some of you. The majority of you are going to say, all right, Matt, I've been following this. I've seen your videos. I've been following this outside of this, reading all the stuff that's on it. There was a legal precedent. There were cases and orders I could rely on from courts that said the federal government can't enforce that. Those are all gone. Okay, the deadline is here. There's nothing left from a legal order or a legal basis you can stand on besides the earlier position I gave, which means you need to file the BOI. Now, I filed them for my own entities, myself. We've done them for our clients across the country, for their LLCs and corporations. We can help you too. Do it yourself. Go to fincen.gov and file your own BOI. It is not that complicated. Now, that information with FINcen is private. That is not a public searchable database. So all the information you're providing on who owns that LLC or corporation is not something somebody can look up. I know a lot of states where some of you have filed your LLCs or corporations, a lot of that information is searchable by freaking anyone, and it's annoying. But this is not a database that will be publicly searchable. In fact, other government agencies, including states, do not have access to this unless they get a subpoena from the court that requires FINcen to provide information, okay? So only FINcen, the Department of Treasury, would typically have access to this unless there's a subpoena from a court giving another government agency access to it. All right, so now you can, that's not publicly searchable, but it is, of course, going to the federal government, so they will know who is owning your corporation or your LLCs and who has substantial control. Now, you're typically filing your tax returns. They know this anyways. Let's go over a couple exceptions to this. There are a couple of different entities and groups of people that don't need to file the BOI that was in the original Corporate Transparency Act, the initial law where this is passed. The 2 biggest exceptions where you don't need to file is what's called the large entity exemption, and then the second one is the inactive entity exemption. So let me go over those 2. The first one, the large company exemption, says if you have 20 or more full-time employees and more than 5 million of revenue on your tax return, you don't need to file it. In other words, what they're saying is if you're this big and you're filing payroll reports for all those employees and you're filing a tax return showing 5 million or more of revenue, we know who you are. You already have enough activity with us. We know who you are. You don't need to give us this information. The ones they think are committing fraud and illegal activities is the ones sending nothing to the IRS or very little information to the IRS. So that was the rationale on the large entity exemption. Now, for me, I'm kind of pissed off by that exemption because small business owners don't get to rely on it. All the large companies don't have to file this BOI. So really, where's the burden been on filing BOIs? On small business owners that can't rely on this large entity exemption. All right, now the next exemption you could rely on is what's called the inactive entity exemption. And that says any entities that you have no business, there's nothing being conducted in it, that were set up before January of 2020, you do not have to file a BOI. So let's say you had an entity you set up in 2018. Maybe you owned a rental property and you've sold that rental property. Nothing else is happening in that entity. Well, you don't actually need to file a BOI at all, okay? Let's say on the other hand, you set up an entity in 2022 and maybe it was a side hustle, but you're not doing it anymore, but the entity's still laying around. You still need to file a BOI in that exemption, in that instance, because the exemption does not apply to you. So the date of importance here for the inactive entity exemption is entities established before January of 2020, where there is currently no activity over the last 12 months. Now, there's some other exemptions there, but they mostly apply to like you have a federal license or you're a bank or a credit union or regulated by the SEC or some public accounting firm. Okay, most of them don't apply to many of you listening here and many small business owners or investors. Those are the two we've seen that many of our clients have relied on. The inactive one for all their entities they're currently not using that were set up before 2020, or also the large businesses where they have 5 million or more of revenue and 20 full-time or more employees. All right, now I'm going to be coming back with more updates on this. If there are any developments on the case, I'm going to be coming back giving you updates on this. Any extension deadlines. One thing FINcen did put into their announcement is they are initiating a process this year to revise the BOI reporting rule to reduce the burden for lower risk entities, including many U.S. small businesses. We don't know what that's going to be. Maybe there'll be another exemption for small businesses or a lesser filing requirement, making it easier for them. So stay tuned. I'll, of course, update you on that. But again, right now, you have until March 21st, 2025 to file this BOI. We'll be providing updates here. Make sure you're subscribed. Now, in addition to going over BOIs for your LLCs or corporations, I'm talking about saving taxes, protecting your assets, and building wealth on my channel. So please subscribe and pay attention to that content. I want to be your resource for growing and building wealth. I'm Mat Sorensen.